Let's talk about why millionaires never own assets in their own name and the exact numbered strategies they use instead to keep their ownership private, their control intact, and their assets much harder to reach. Most people think wealth is about accumulation. Build the business, buy the house, buy the rentals, stack the accounts, build the portfolio. But the moment real money shows up, the rules change, because once you have something worth taking, ownership becomes a form of exposure. And if your name is directly tied to your house, your rental properties, your companies, your bank accounts, or the streams of income feeding your lifestyle, you're not just successful, you're searchable, you're traceable. You are legible to a lawsuit. Most people do not understand that until they get the letter, the demand, the subpoena, or the call from a lawyer that changes the tone of the week. In my 35 years in the asset protection industry, I've seen a very predictable pattern. The people who get hurt the worst are usually not the reckless ones. They are often disciplined, productive, high-earning, intelligent people who did the hard part beautifully and the structuring part poorly. They built wealth first and assumed they would deal with privacy and protection later. But later has a nasty habit of arriving 5 minutes after the problem occurs. And if you appreciate this kind of information, please click the like button so to promote this video. Many thanks. And click the subscribe button if you haven't already so that when more videos come out like this, you'll get notified. And if you want to protect your assets, structure your real estate, or understand how exposed you may be right now, you can visit assetprotectionplanners.com, and there's a lot of free information there. So today, I want to do this differently, not a general lecture. I want to give you a numbered list of the actual tools the rich use to create privacy of ownership, and in some cases, much more than privacy. I'm going to walk you through these one by one, tell you what each tool does, what problem it solves, where it fits into the puzzle, and how it feels when somebody finally has done it right. And I'm also going to tell you a few stories. Some are composites based on real patterns we've seen. The names and details are changed, of course, but the emotions and the risks are real. Strategy number one, the land trust. In fact, I've personally drafted over 1,000 land trusts, and this is one of the cleanest privacy tools for a house or rental property. Most people buy real estate in their own name because that is what ordinary people do. The deed goes into the buyer's name. The county records reflect the buyer's name, and the public trail begins immediately. And that may feel harmless when life is quiet, but if you are successful or visible, a property in your personal name is like a sign in the yard that says, "Here's part of my net worth." A land trust changes that. The title to the property goes into the trust name instead of your personal name. Now, in the public records, it's no longer Kevin Smith or Susan Jones owning the property. It's something like a Palm Breeze Trust or Maple Ridge Trust. In fact, we had a client, I'll call him David, a serious real estate investor with a home he loved and several rentals he had accumulated over time, and he had worked for them, improved them, managed the chaos. You know how much work these things are, and he built real equity. He assumed insurance was enough and that keeping things simple was smart. A tenant dispute happened, and it got ugly. It had not even become full litigation yet, but emotions were rising. Threats were being made, and somebody on the other side had started pulling records. When David came in, we showed him how quickly a stranger could map his properties just by searching the public records. In fact, I still remember the look on his face. It was not panic. It was like a slower, colder realization, the kind that says, I have been standing in the middle of the room with the lights on. In fact, we moved his properties into properly structured land trusts for privacy of ownership. And when he called back later, his exact words were, "I finally feel like my private life is private again." And that is what land trusts do. It does not solve every problem, but it gets your personal name off of the front porch of your real estate, and that matters. So land trust for privacy is strategy number one. Keep your name out of the public records. Strategy number two is using a Wyoming corporation for privacy. Now, by the way, when we do set up a land trust, we'll typically set up a Wyoming LLC as the trustee of that land trust, We'll have a nominee privacy service and a virtual office in Wyoming, and more about that later. Now, strategy number 2, the Wyoming Corporation for privacy of income and account activity. So this is one not talked about enough, and wealthy people love tools that do not look flashy, but quietly change the game. Wyoming allows corporate naming flexibility, and that can be very useful when structured properly. Now, in certain situations, a corporation in Wyoming can be named in a way that does not scream corporation to the world. And that makes it very practical, and a very practical difference in how checks are received and deposited. So if income would normally flow to you personally, it instead flows into a corporate account. So therefore, you've created separation. Taxes are still paid. So this is not a tax evasion gimmick. This is about privacy and presentation. It's about not having every meaningful dollar tied directly back to your Social Security number and personal account structure. So a client, I'll call Melissa, had a consulting business and several side revenue streams. She was highly competent, highly visible, very easy to map financially because everything came straight to her. So checks in her own name, deposits in her own accounts, contracts tied directly to her. She was not doing anything particularly wrong. She was just operating like somebody who had never been taught how the wealthy structure things. We helped create a Wyoming corporate setup that changed the way money flowed, changing the fact that her taxes were still paid. Several months later, she told me something that stuck with me. She said, "For the first time, I feel like a real businesswoman instead of an exposed person with income." So that is a powerful sentence. Once someone stops feeling naked financially, they stand differently. So here's how it works. If your name is John Smith, we simply name the Wyoming Corporation John Smith, since they don't require the Corp or Inc. at the end of the corporate name like a lot of states do. So you can open up an account in the name of John Smith, the Wyoming Corporation, and when you get a check made payable to your name, you can simply deposit the check in that account, and it's not tied to your name personally. So that gives you separation, privacy. So if somebody subpoenas your account, they don't see the corporate account because it's in the corporation's tax ID number, not your Social Security number. So that's how the Wyoming Corporation privacy works. Strategy number 3 is the Wyoming LLC, like we hinted on earlier. The Wyoming LLC with nominee manager. So you own the LLC, but you nominate us as a manager, and a virtual office. This is one of the most attractive tools for privacy because it allows someone to own 100% of the company while keeping their own name and home address out of the public record. So when structured correctly, the nominee manager appears publicly rather than the true owner, and the virtual office keeps the client's personal residence from being part of the file trail. So you still own the company. You still control the economics. You still have all the voting rights. You still benefit from it. But the public-facing record is no longer an engraved invitation to whoever wants to dig. So we had a physician, a client of ours, and doctors are famous for being visible targets, who owned entities that all pointed straight back to his house. Same address everywhere, same obvious trail, but same personal footprint on everything. And then a claim arose from a situation that had nothing to do with fraud or misconduct, just the kind of professional conflict that can spiral when enough money is involved. So he sat in our office and said something I hear a lot from successful people when the light bulb goes on. "I had no idea I was this easy to find." So we cleaned it up. Wyoming LLC, nominee manager, virtual office, and that was the trustee of the land trust that we put his home into. So better separation, better layering. Weeks later, he said the best part was not even the paperwork. It was the feeling that his family home was no longer connected like a blinking red arrow to every business decision made. So that emotional relief is huge. You can breathe a sigh of relief because privacy is not just tactical, it's psychological. So again, house in a land trust. We make the trustee of that land trust a Wyoming LLC with nominee manager and a virtual office. We provide all that setup for clients. We've done that thousands of times. Strategy number 4 is layering a land trust with an LLC, a beneficiary for real estate. So that is where sophisticated planning starts to feel sophisticated. A lot of people hear land trust and stop there, but the wealthy do not usually stop there. A common approach is to put the property into a land trust for title privacy, and then we set up a an LLC, usually in the state where the property is located, as the beneficiary behind the trust. So that way, you're not just removing your personal name from the public deed records, you're also creating an entity layer behind the trust. So if there was a lawsuit on that property, it stops in the catcher's mitt here, and that's the LLC that serves as the beneficiary of that trust. So the property is private on the outside and structured on the inside. So that combination is much more powerful than either tool standing alone. Now, one of our clients owned a waterfront home, 2 rentals. He had spent his whole life becoming financially secure, only to realize that he had become legally visible in the process. So he told us he would wake up in the middle of the night worrying that one bad accident in a rental property would just put his whole balance sheet in play. So after we structured the ownership through the land trust and the beneficiary LLC, he sent a message that I still remember, that now we typically do this, do the LLC beneficiaries for rental property. We typically don't do it for personal residence. There are some states where it works, but typically the LLC the Wyoming LLC will be the trustee of the land trust, but the LLC as a beneficiary is typically solely for rental properties, for tax purposes, homestead purposes, and so on. So anyway, he sent a message to us. He said, I slept through the night, and that was it. No legal jargon, no dramatic praise, just the sentence that matters. I slept through the night is what he told us. And that is what good structuring buys people, a lot of times, peace of mind. Not just legal advantage, sleep. Okay, strategy number 5, separating banking from personal identity. So this is where many people sabotage otherwise decent structures. They set up entities, but they keep all the money flowing into personal accounts, or they deposit everything into the same banking relationship tied directly to themselves. So that's like putting a disguise on and then introducing yourself anyway. So the wealthy separate the flow of money, not just the ownership of the entity. So entity income goes into entity accounts. Property income goes where the structure says it should go. Personal accounts stop being the central nervous system for every financial decision in a person's life. A client I'll call Renee had rental income, consulting income, and investing income all washing into her personal accounts because it was convenient. Convenient is often the enemy of private. Once we cleaned that up, her structures actually started behaving like structures instead of decorations. So she said something that was funny when it was finished. She said, before this, my LLC was basically a Halloween costume. And she was right. A lot of people wear legal costumes and think they're armored. They're not. Separation has to be lived, not just filed. Strategy number 6, and this is the granddaddy of them all, the Cook Islands Trust with the Cook Islands LLC inside of it. And that is the point in the conversation when we move from privacy to privacy plus the strongest asset protection in the world when the planning is done correctly. And I do not say that lightly. I've been working with Cook Islands Trust for nearly 30 years, and there is a reason sophisticated planners return to them again and again. A land trust can keep your name off of a deed. A Wyoming corporation can create privacy around income. A nominee managed LLC can reduce your public footprint, but a properly structured Cook Islands Trust does something much, much deeper. It changes legal leverage. Now, here's the simple version. The Cook Islands Trust, we talk about this in so many of our videos, it owns a Cook Islands LLC. When life is calm, the client can often serve as the manager of the LLC and enjoy practical control. The assets, however, are held through an offshore structure under a jurisdiction that does not simply bow to U.S. court judgments. If serious legal pressure arises, control can shift into the offshore trustee company under the terms of the structure. And that matters because the courts in the United States are strongest when they can reach assets directly or compel a person to repatriate or bring back what they control. The Cook Islands model is powerful precisely because it is built around lawful separation of control under pressure. And that changes everything. In fact, I remember a client who had built a valuable business and also became in the process a perfect target. You know, that goes. He came to us before a major transaction because he felt uneasy, not hysterical, just uneasy. He said, I'm thinking about getting into deeper water than I want to be in. So we built a structure properly. Months later, the deal totally blew up and litigation started. The other side came in hot, assuming they had found another successful American with reachable assets. Then they found the Cook Islands trust structure. The tone changed. What looked like a full speed attack became a negotiation. So this is what leverage looks like. The best asset protection often does not produce some dramatic movie scene. It produces hesitation on the other side. And hesitation is worth a fortune. Strategy number 7, the Belize Trust, with a Belize LLC aside, especially where somebody is already in active litigation or danger is no longer theoretical but real. Belize is not the same as the Cook Islands. It can be an important alternative in the right circumstances. One reason it's discussed so often in high-risk planning is that Belize has legal characteristics that can be very attractive and when timing is already a problem. If somebody waited too long, if the threat is already live, Belize has become part of the discussion because of how it treats foreign judgments and because of the advantages people often point to when time is short and calm time planning has already been missed. So there is a sadness in these cases because the story often begins with regret. A client once told me, as a matter of fact, I knew I needed to do something, but I just kept thinking next month. And then next month showed up wearing a lawsuit. So we were still able to help with a Belize-based structure that improved the strategic picture, but it was not the same emotional experience as clients who planned ahead. The late planners are often grateful, but they are also angry at themselves. And that is why I push timing so hard. Privacy is easier before panic. Protection is stronger before the fire starts. That brings us to strategy number 8, the Nevis Trust, with a Nevis LLC inside of it. Now, Nevis is another jurisdiction sophisticated people use when they want strong offshore options and meaningful barriers for creditors. In some cases, it is the right fit. In others, it's an alternative rather than the primary recommendation. So the wealthy know there is a toolbox and they choose it deliberately. Strategy number 9, using multiple entities for multiple functions instead of letting one entity do everything. So the rich do not pile all activity, all assets, and all identity into a single bucket. One entity may hold a business like an LLC. Another may hold a beneficiary interest like another LLC. Another may receive income. Another may act as part of a privacy layer. So the principle is simple. Do not make the outside world's job easy by concentrating all roads into one obvious place. In fact, we had a client who owned a business, rentals, and valuable personal property, all linked through a handful of obvious structures. One attack could illuminate everything. After restructuring, his world looked very different. The more compartments, more privacy, more distance. He laughed and said, I used to live in a studio apartment. Now I live in a fortress with hallways. So that's not a bad description of good structuring. Now, let's move on to strategy number 10, and that is understanding the philosophy behind all these tools. Own nothing personally that does not need to be owned personally, and control everything lawfully through structure. That line gets repeated because it's so true. The wealthy do not worship title. They value control, access, benefits, income, use, and leverage. They are less emotionally attached to seeing their own personal name on everything because they understand that personal title can be one of the weakest positions to occupy. If your ego needs to see your own name on every deed and every account, the legal system will gladly use that vanity against you. A client once said to me, I don't care whose name is on it as long as I control it, my family is safe. And that is the shift from personal ownership to strategic control, from being a clean target to being expensive to chase. So if you take one thing from this video, take this. Privacy is not magic, it's structure. The rich use land trusts for privacy of ownership on homes and rental properties. They use Wyoming Corporation to change the way income flows and to avoid having everything tied directly to them personally. They use Wyoming LLCs with nominee managers in virtual offices so they can own 100% without putting their names and addresses into the public records. They use layered entities instead of single buckets. And when they want the highest level of privacy, plus the strongest asset protection in the world, they move to the Cook Islands Trust with a Cook Islands LLC inside of it. If they waited too long, they may look to Belize. If they want another offshore option with strong barriers, Nevis may also come into play. So none of these tools is about games. They are about reducing exposure, increasing your leverage, and keeping what you built from being too easy to reach. So at the end of the day, lawsuits are often about who is reachable, and the wealthy know that. That is why they structure. That is why they layer. And that is why they do not leave a bright, clean trail from their name to everything they own. They understand something ordinary people often learn far too late. If you own assets the normal way, you may be making yourself valuable in exactly the wrong way. And if you want help thinking through how these tools apply to your situation, go to assetprotectionplanners.com. Start there, learn more, ask better questions, because the best time to build privacy is before somebody gives you a reason that you wish you had. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.